to wind up, as is the convention for 30-minute debates. Order, order. Jim Allister to move the motion.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I beg to move that this House has considered the impact of the winter framework on parcel deliveries across the Irish. Madam Chair, tomorrow, the 1st of May, the noose of the REC border tightens even further in respect of business in Northern Ireland. We already have the red lane REC border, full complement of all EU requirements, through which all raw materials for our businesses has to pass. We also have what was called the Green Lane, renamed but a little otherwise changed for the passage of other goods. We have a business-to-consumer border for parcels. And now, and in some ways the most threatening because of the scale of the businesses that will be affected, we have the business-to-business parcel border. And that is a border which, of course, is in place, partitioning the supposed United Kingdom and the supposed internal market of the United Kingdom. An internal market, of course, the essence of it is that goods move unfettered, unchecked, between and within all parts. What we now have, courtesy of the absurd protocol, or now as we call it the Windsor Framework, is in view of the fact that that decreed that we in Northern Ireland are subject to the EU's customs code, which then decrees that GB is a third or foreign country. We now have this absurdity of various dimensions of border for the passage of goods from GB to Northern Ireland. And of course, Northern Ireland is an economy which for 200 years has been very intensely integrated with the GB economy, particularly in manufacturing. And it was always the northern part of Ireland which had the big manufacturing sectors, and therefore the integration, and in particular in regard to the supply of raw materials, has been pivotal, and GB has been the primary source of all of that. Now, parcels are going to be subject to rigorous EU requirements, matters such as needing a commodity code, in a moment, the country of origin in respect of each item, value of each item, the total value of all the items in the parcel, and any goods which are at risk of passing into the EU single market across the border. And the presumption, and that's one of the weaknesses of this protocol, the presumption is that everything's at risk. Anything that's at risk of passing, and therefore any raw material, because if it's going into manufacturing, who knows where it will end up. Any raw material of that nature has to go through all that rigour. And that is a preposterous imposition, not just in bureaucracy, but in cost and in making Northern Ireland non-competitive. Because it means the business manufacturing something in Northern Ireland, which then wants to sell back on the GB market or whatever, is subject to restraints which are going to increase the costs, and therefore they are less and less competitive. And that is one of the greatest iniquities of the sea border and of the business to parcel border. And I want to make this point. We have had the protocol in place for 4 years. Is there any evidence that business parcels are imposing any harm on the EU single market? Any evidence? Has the government, has the EU, has anyone done an audit of this alleged harm that business parcels passing from GB to Northern Ireland could do? Because for 4 years they've been flowing unfettered because of the grace periods. So where's the harm that's been caused to the single market that must now be protected? Yes, okay, boy.
Would you remember accept that probably one of the points the Minister is going to make in response is that, well, firms can apply to be part of the UK internal market scheme and therefore escape some of this because they can show, but they've got to show that goods are not at risk. And as he's pointed out, there's no evidence that goods are at risk. But even the process now of applying to be part of the market scheme, the internal market scheme, HMRC are saying that it could take months for firms to have their applications processed. And secondly, even when they are processed, the amount of work which has then got to go into showing that the goods did not go into the Irish Republic adds considerable costs and is a considerable barrier in doing trade.
The natural, inevitable consequence of that is that GB suppliers will simply say, it's not worth the candle. We're not going to make the effort. Why should we put ourselves through all these hoops in order to supply into Northern Ireland? It's not a huge market in the first place. Why should we do that? So we'll simply stop supplying. That's already happened for consumers. I constantly get complaints, but I'm now increasingly getting complaints from businesses who say, we know that our suppliers will simply stop supplying. And that is going to be another hammer blow to our economy. Yes.
First of all, can I congratulate the member for Northampton for bringing this forward? And he's right to underline the issues and the concerns that his constituents and my constituents have. The internal market movement that begins tomorrow, as he says, that means importers must be members of the internal market scheme, as my honourable friend referred to, as an authorised party. My constituents tell me that they're most concerned, most confused, and don't quite understand with the system. So does the member agree that it's totally unrealistic that government expects small businesses and individuals, my constituents in Strangford, to understand the obligations and abide by them due to the ridiculous EU interference? Government has an easier way of sorting this out. Really must take steps to legally remove the obligation from its citizens in Northern Ireland. Do that and the problems are solved.
Indeed. And of course, it is a real issue. In my constituency of Northampton, I have many satellite small engineering firms. Many of them are subcontractors to Wrightbus, for example. They get their raw materials, and sometimes we're talking about a parcel of bolts or a parcel of washers or nuts. They get them from GB. Now, to get that simple parcel of bolts or anything like that, they have to now go through the processes, because they're manufacturers, of the red rain impact of the business-to-business border. And that in circumstances where there is no evidence, or if there were, we'd have heard of it, there is no evidence that the EU's vast single market is being in the least impacted by business-to-business parcels. But the people that will now be affected are those businesses, the people that employ my constituents. And of course, the other consequence of this, the machinations of this border, is this: that when GB suppliers stop supplying, and you have to get your raw materials from somewhere, some of them will have to come from the Republic of Ireland. And of course, that is the overall underlying intent of the Windsor Framework, to reorientate the economy of Northern Ireland away from its GB roots and connections, and to force an increase in all Ireland trade. And here we are arriving at a situation where we have a perfectly unfettered all-island single market. But the nation of which we are a part, the United Kingdom, our single market is now fettered and partitioned. And that was the intent of the protocol, because the protocol was always about making Northern Ireland the price of Brexit. And so it is turning out to be. Yes, I'll go back.
And the members outlined very clearly the bureaucratic issues which are involved here, which disturb trade. the political implications, the long-term political implications, but we also accept that for firms there are economic implications. Either they are forced to purchase goods from elsewhere. If they weren't purchasing from elsewhere in the first place, probably because they were too expensive, so they've got more expensive ones. And secondly, I don't know how to turn it. And secondly, many of these firms are having to pay taxes on goods which they bring into Northern Ireland, then reclaim them, and HMRC are taking not weeks but months to pay those taxes back if they can be reclaimed, causing cash flow problems.
The Honourable Member makes a key point, because if you're bringing business-to-business parcels into Northern Ireland from your own country, from GB, and they are decreed, as the presumption is, to be at risk of, in their ultimate manifestation when manufactured, going into the EU single market, then you not only have to complete the full EU-dictated data regime of declarations, but you have to pay duty. And you have to pay duty to bring goods from your own country to another part of your own country. That is how extensive and how wrong placing Northern Ireland on the EU's single market and customs code has proven to be. That now to move goods, they are subject to taxation tariffs because they're moving from a foreign so-called single market into what's decreed to be the entry point to the EU's single market. And I have a question for the Secretary of State. Where will those duties and when will those duties be collected? Because the Honourable Member for East Antrim has pointed out, we already know that when duties in the Red Lane, for example, are collected, and they may be recoverable if you can ultimately show, and the onus is on you, that they don't go into the EU single market. You pay duty on them on the presumption they will. If you can ultimately show they won't, you're entitled to reclaim. But it is taking months upon months. But the question I have for the Secretary of State is, where and when will the duties on parcels be collected? And will the parcels be held until the duties are paid? Are we really going to get into the ludicrous situation where someone buying a parcel of boats to bring them into Ballymena or Ballymoney is going to have to pay duty on those boats because he's bringing them from a foreign market, even though it's the GB market? Where and when will he have to pay that duty? Because we all know that he will wait months upon months to ever get that duty back, if he can demonstrate, and it's very difficult in a manufacturing situation, if he can demonstrate that the end product never went near the EU. So the absurdity of this is very obvious, but the political connotations are very overwhelming, because they send a very clear constitutional message to the people of Northern Ireland. You're not really any longer a part of the United Kingdom. Your trade laws, your customs laws, the laws that govern how you make your goods, are now all made by a foreign parliament, not by this parliament. And here I am, a member, standing in the United Kingdom Parliament, dealing with a situation whereby we're talking about something where the rules that govern it are set by a foreign jurisdiction, and they are rules of that foreign jurisdiction, where it is their foreign border. And that sends a very clear constitutional message. And that was, of course, the intent of the protocol, to create, through economics, a stepping stone for Northern Ireland out of the United Kingdom. And we now have a government who, in their junior minister, tell us a couple of dodgy opinion polls might be enough to trigger the exit sign for Northern Ireland out of the United Kingdom. So, Madam Chair, those are some of the issues which rightly concern us, particularly concern business, who have been very patient with government, who have been looking for guidance for months and haven't got adequate guidance, and now know they are facing a dire situation where even to keep their business going on the basic raw materials that have flowed for decades from the source to their business, they are now going to be put through not just the difficulty, but the humiliation of not being a proper part of this United Kingdom. And the Secretary of State can tell us all he likes about how we have access to dual markets. No, we don't. We have unfettered access to the EU single market, but our access to and from GB is very much fettered by these rules. And that is the fundamental objection to a nation, to a part of a nation whose economy is so intertwined with that of Great Britain. Thank you.